This is day 49 in my 6-mark challenge for AQA GCSE Science. In the run-up to the exams, I'll be posting new 6-mark questions each Monday, Wednesday and Friday, so you can practice how to answer them. You can find a link in the description below to each week's questions and also access all of the videos in the whole playlist. So here's our question for day 49. Compare the structure of a sperm cell with the structure of a cell in the palisade mesophyll. So obviously here we're thinking about specialised cells. Now before you dive into writing an answer, I want to remind you of a few things. Firstly, AQA GCSE Science examiners are not assessing your use of spelling and grammar and paragraphs. Your ideas need to be presented in a logical order, but there aren't any marks for full sentences. The only situation in which your spelling needs to be perfect is when we've got those little pairs of words that are so close to each other that they need to be sure you're using the right one, like mitosis and meiosis. The rest of the time, even if your spelling is a bit wonky, you do still get credit. And in fact, not only are you allowed to use bullet points and numbered lists and tables, I would really strongly recommend that you do, because it helps you to lay out your ideas in a more logical order, and that's going to make it easier for the examiner to mark it. You might even choose to write a little plan in the corner of the page before you start, and actually your marker can give you marks for that plan even if you haven't written anything at all in the main body where you're supposed to write your answer. My other advice is to be really careful that you are answering the full question. Very often these 6-mark questions are what we call level marked, particularly for biology. And so in order to get the highest marks, you don't just need to say 6 true correct things. You need to actually be making sure that you're answering all parts of the question. So for instance here, if we only discussed the sperm cell and didn't mention the palisade mesophyll at all, we would definitely be capped and be unable to get the full 6 marks. The command word for this question is compare, so immediately we know that we need to be discussing differences but also similarities. Very commonly candidates forget to talk about the similarities and therefore can't access the highest marks. And then as we've already said, of course we need to discuss both of these cells. So I would say this is a classic example of somewhere that it's good to lay your answer out as a table, and that way your marker can see very, very clearly that you have covered all 4 of these aspects. So to start with, some similarities. Both of these cells are eukaryotic cells, and that means that they contain a nucleus, cytoplasm, cell membrane, mitochondria and ribosomes. Then in terms of differences between them, the sperm cell doesn't have a cell wall, whereas the palisade cell does, and we might even say that that cell wall is made of cellulose. Then we can also say that the sperm cell also doesn't have any chloroplasts or even any free chlorophyll, whereas the palisade cell of course has lots of chloroplasts. The sperm cell doesn't contain a permanent vacuole, whereas the palisade cell does. And then finally, the sperm cell has a tail, or you might have referred to it as a flagellum, whereas palisade cells don't, because they're not mobile, they don't need to go anywhere. Now we do always want to be looking for places that we can add a little bit of extra detail or a little bit of extra nuance. So we might point out that even though both of these cells contain mitochondria, the sperm cell is going to have more mitochondria because it needs those for movement. Or we could also point out that within their nuclei, the sperm cell only has 1 copy of each gene. It's haploid and it only contains half of the paternal DNA, whereas the nucleus of the palisade cell contains 2 copies of each gene. It's diploid. We could also discuss the function of each one of these subcellular structures that these specialised cells have. So we've already mentioned that the sperm has a tail to allow it to swim to the egg or to allow it to move. The vacuole in the palisade cell is a store of cell sap or a store of water. The chlorophyll is to absorb light, which the plant is going to use as a source of energy for photosynthesis. And that cellulose cell wall is there to strengthen the cell. In terms of how this is marked, this is going to be a classic example of a level marked question. So that means that we're not getting 6 marks for 6 true statements. We need to be making links and we need to be making sure we've got full coverage of the question. So your level 1 is going to be for single isolated statements. So you could pick any 2 of the things that are written on here and probably get 2 marks for those. Then to get into level 2, that 3 or 4 marks, we're going to need to start seeing linked statements. So quite often for similarities, they will take any of the statements as a linked statement on their own. So if you say they're both eukaryotic cells, that counts as a linked statement and would get you into level 2. But if we were going to talk about the differences, we would need no cell wall for the sperm cell and cell wall for the palisade cell, and that would be a linked pair of sentences. Then to get into our level 3 and to get 5 marks, we're going to need to make sure that we've talked about both the similarities and the differences. So you're going to need something from this green section up here, and then also one of these red ones, some of the differences that are there. And of course, we still need those links. And then the difference between 5 marks and 6 marks tends to be, have you got some additional detail? So these extra things we've put in, like having extra mitochondria for movement, or having the flagellum for movement, or strengthening the cell, or the chloroplasts being for photosynthesis, or the vacuole being a store of cell sap or water, that's what's going to get us that 6th mark. On Wednesday, we're moving on to chemistry paper 1, and our question is about the modern model of the atom. Remember, there's a link in the description to all of the questions for the rest of this week's video. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you again on Wednesday for day 50 of our 6-mark challenge. If you found this video useful, then don't forget to like and subscribe for more GCSE Science revision videos coming soon.